personally looking at a college campus, there's a ton of social justice movement. There's younger individuals who are wanting to really see change and make change. So this is really just trying to get the look of what it looks like to be more active in social justice as an activist, as a student. So we have some amazing panelists with us here. I'll introduce each one. So first off, we have David Ferris. He is a senior at UCO studying computer science and digital forensics with a minor in criminal justice. He is also the current president of our Diversity Roundtable. Next, we have Falana McHenry. She is a sophomore studying nursing and is the current vice president of our Student Alliance for Equality. Next is Evan Bostick. He is a senior majoring in business administration and legal studies and is the current president of our chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Up next is Emily Grimm, who is also a senior studying political science and mass communication. And she has been involved with leadership through PLC, our President's Leadership Council, and student government for the past 3 years. And that included serving as student body president last year. Then we have James Limbaugh, who is a junior studying political science and is our incoming student body president. And finally, we have Christian Coleman, who is a UCO student. He's serving as our vice president. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for agreeing to do this. Any attendees, if you have any questions as we're going through this, please submit them through the Q&A and we will get over to them. So first question is, how do you define activism? There's an official definition, but official definitions can be interpreted in different ways. So how is it defined for you?
So I'll start if that's okay. So I would define activism as being able to speak up in a situation where you feel uncomfortable or where you feel there is an injustice. And when I say speaking up, that can be verbally, that can be speaking up through writing a letter, that can be speaking up through communicating with someone who you feel like will be in a position to have a voice that you don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking up in. So that would be my personal definition.
I can follow up on that. To me, it's pretty plain and simple. You know, it's an action, and you actually putting something into motion. Whatever your motive or what's driving you, as long as there's an action to better the situation, better the stance, then I think that to me is activism. It can be small, it can be big, but taking action behind a cause actively is what I believe, in my opinion, is activism.
Oh, yeah, I can answer that question too, Mickey. To me, activism, it starts with identifying a problem. You know, if we don't know what we want to change in society, we can't ever address it. So I feel like it takes a lot of awareness in seeing what in our society needs to change and what we can do. And I think activism, it starts with finding it. And then after that, it starts with taking an action. Not only an action in yourself, but it takes empowering others to kind of work with you, because being an activist by yourself isn't very powerful, but at times when you connect with other activists and you do it as a team and you do it together, big things can happen. And we've seen that in the United States a lot.
Anybody else want to jump in on this one? Or did they really cover it for everybody? Alrighty. So our next one is sort of more of a looking at steps, right? So how did you become an activist, right? So what steps did you take? Was there any certain things that you had to look at to be able to do what you do?
I think James put a really good point of trying to find out what a problem is first to have steps to fix that. So the first thing that I did was to try to see the different areas that can be fixed upon rather than trying to say that this needs to be fixed, because I feel like if you know what's wrong with it, it is a lot easier to fix rather than trying to remake something new again.
In regards to your question, I think for me, what allowed me to find my place in activism, and I mean, I think I do okay, but I could do more, was me finding my voice. I was not always the extrovert, talk to anyone, go hard for a cause, up in the forefront type of Christian. I used to be really reserved, self-conscious, things like that. But it took for me to find like my voice within myself, one to grow from that, but to actually speak on issues that I felt passionately about. And I think that I found I found my voice in I found my voice in what worked for me, and it allowed me to find my way in my activism as a student, you can say. But I think in order to do that, you have to find your voice before you can, speak actively and strongly for a cause.
So I'll touch a little bit on that one. So I agree. I agree as well with what you guys are saying. I think that for me, I feel like most people are activists, whether they identify with the word per se or not. I feel like your activism comes in when you see wrongdoings, when you feel like that an injustice has happened to you. I feel like for me personally, it begins to be things that are very childish, as far as getting in trouble by your parents and realizing that it was something that your siblings did, or something that that didn't actually happen in that light or in that manner. So you push hard, and you push, and you drive to, so they can see, basically, so they can get the viewpoint of what you have. So in a sense, at a young age, I feel like a lot of us were activists within our schools, within our families, just trying to get them to understand where we're coming from. And I feel like as maturing into adults and into adulthood, that we continue to do that because of what we see, what's going on around us. We see injustice happening to us, to our friends, to our family members, to our community and outside of our community, and we're wanting to have other people get the same viewpoint as us, to see where we're coming from. That we're not just complaining about things, we're not just crying about things, but there's a reasoning behind it. So I would say, for me, to jump back to the initial question, I feel like it comes from just seeing wrongdoings, and wanting to try and get people to get your perspective on those.
I agree with all those. It's really important, to not only identify issues, find your voice, and see that you've been being an activist in little ways to be able to go into bigger things, higher things, not really bigger, but higher, different types. So our next one, Falana, Emily, if you want to jump in on this one, what are different ways you have been active in social justice movements, whether social media, marches, rallies, etc.?
I would say I'm pretty new to this game. Like, I haven't been doing this for super long, but like you said earlier, I'm the vice president of SAFE. So I think one thing I'm really proud of is I've tried to do a lot of educational stuff. So just explain to people different things and ideas and stuff like that. Does that make sense? It's kind of vague. And I guess this was one main point I wanted to bring to the table, is that we think that activism is this very clear cut thing, but it really isn't. There's a lot of different ways you can do it and execute it. So if you're a person where you don't feel like you're a very good speaker, or you're not very outgoing, there's other ways you can still contribute and make a difference without traditional activism. There's other ways you can help. So
I think for me, it's a lot of, I think a lot of us can say we really had a catalyst that pushed us into, like James said, recognizing the issue. Like Evan said, just recognizing, whether that be in your day-to-day life or in your family, in your communities, that there is something that's not right. And so for me, something that I think is really important is trying to provide as many points to access those catalysts for people as we can. So kind of like we were saying with social media, every now and then you can share something to your story or you can tweet something. And I've had aunts or cousins send me a message and ask me to explain more, or whether that be students who come to UCO for the first time from a small town and who never have even examined their privilege or examined the state of the world, being able to have access to a class where they learn about history, about real Oklahoma history for the first time ever. And so for me, I think it's been really about, whether that be whenever I was an orientation leader and really diving into like our diversity trainings, or especially within UCOSA. I know that I've talked about it before, but whenever I first joined UCOSA my freshman year, we were so far below the amount of senators we were supposed to have. And so being able to build that up over the last couple of years, because it's so important, but it was so secret. And so I would say something that is really important to me is trying to reach out to people as much as I can.
James, Evan, Christian, David, any of y'all want to jump in here?
Yeah, Mickey, I can hop in and answer this. For me, I think personally, a lot of my role, I want to agree with Falana here. She said made a great point. I think it's a lot of it's education and awareness. I think a lot of times, coming from a place of privilege, and I'm surrounded with a lot of other people that are surrounded with privilege, and I feel like a lot of times it's understanding that I will never understand fully the things that some people go through, but having enough empathy to realize that and just say, I'm never going to know, but I understand, and I'm going to try my best to be alongside you and be along for that and be along for the fight. And I feel like that's a lot of times is something that people take for granted, and they're like, they see that they have privilege and they don't see the problem, so they don't think a problem exists. I'm from a small town, like Emily. Me and Christian actually went back to my hometown to our Black Lives Matter march in my small town, and it was a really good turnout. But there was a post before the rally, and it was by like our local news station, and there was a lot of negative things and a lot of things like saying like basically that there wasn't a problem where we're coming from, and then there's like Salisaw, where I'm from, is like a good place and there's no problems like that. But I think that that's just a part of the privilege, is that we don't recognize there's a problem sometimes because we don't see it in our everyday lives. So I feel like a lot of it has been education and teaching people that there is a problem, even if you don't see it, the problem exists. And for me, that's been a lot of having hard conversations. I think if change is ever going to come, we're going to have to be comfortable with having hard conversations. And it's something that I've pushed myself into, trying my hardest to become a part of those, even when it's not easy. But having those tough conversations, talking about implicit biases, talking about things that I don't recognize, and being aware enough to say, like, I don't know everything. Sometimes I mess up. I have implicit biases, but I'm willing to learn. And I feel like for a lot of people, when you recognize those things and you become willing to learn, things start going in the right directions, and that's when you can start opening your eyes and seeing more and having more empathy towards the cause.
You bring up some really amazing points in there, James, and so I want to touch on real quick. We've used the word privilege a couple times. Some people have said them in their answers as we've been going. So could one of you touch on what it really means, right? Privilege.
So I think people get like really threatened whenever someone brings up like privilege. And I guess the first thing to touch on is that just because someone's saying that you have privilege doesn't mean like you don't have a struggle. Like you can still have a struggle, but you still have privilege. Like everyone here has some sort of privilege. I think we all have privilege because we all get a chance to go to university and things like that. So privilege is just like, more of like an advantage or like something you can't really recognize within yourself. Does that make sense? I mean,
One of
Sorry.
go ahead.
For me, I would almost, and I'm still cultivating my thoughts. So excuse me if I say something that, but I almost think of privilege as the ability to ignore. So in a sense of, a lot of people don't get a chance to ignore things because they happen to them on a daily basis, or they happen to them whether they realize it or not. But in a sense, a lot of people have the privilege to ignore what's going on, you know, to continue to scroll, to continue to act like it doesn't happen, act like things aren't going on around them. And then the influx of doing so and being able to live their daily lives. So again, still kind of, but that's what I'm going to say for now.
And so when we're talking about privilege, something great I saw just voicing so was that it doesn't mean you didn't struggle. It just means a part of your identity was not a reason you struggled. And so that one just really helped me with getting a definition of privilege and looking at things. So we're talking about privilege and all these different things. What does it look like as a student on a college campus? Where do you see different types of privilege? Where do you see it being used, being pushed, really?
Okay. So I feel like I'm talking a lot. But so I would say privilege looks like not sitting in these sessions all summer long. So not having to have these conversations as well as juggle summer courses, not having to go to protests during the school year that people don't realize are going on, and then having to make it to class, not going to different events and different things to better your community while still juggling your coursework and making it to class. So I would say like the privilege of it is again like that ignoring what's going on factor. So, you know, we have a lot of students who aren't able to just, you know, go to class, go to school, do their work. So then it's like that they have so many other things that they have to balance and so many other things that they have to juggle. And it can be whether it can be whether they don't necessarily have to be, how do I say this? You don't have to be like, okay, so I'm a Black male, right? So you don't, just because I'm a Black male, there's things that there's certain things in life that I look at the world differently, but also there's things that James can be doing in the same sense. So in the same sense of me missing class, going to this and going to that and the other, James can be going to the same things that I'm going to, and we can still be fighting for the same cause. But at the same time, you'll have students who will sit there in a classroom and have no idea what's going on or what's going on around them. And then they'll be in a classroom setting where me and James just came in and we've dealt with things that, or we've seen things that are honestly just disgusting. And then we sit in the classroom and we hear things surrounded by our classmates and these ideas and these viewpoints on things. And it's just like, have you not stepped out into just until the world to understand like what's going on around you? Just a thought.
I would like to add, in relation to the university sense, it's like dealing with your daily load, like Evan said, but also having the external pressures and stressors, and they could be micro, you know, little itty bitty things, like driving by a police officer, or, you know, someone looking at you differently when you walk in the store, or, you know, just not feeling comfortable in a space that, or, I mean, I don't, in a university sense, your university and your buildings and your culture on your campus should be representative and should represent at least some part, or communities should all feel welcome in this system. And when you look at privilege, if the system is set for you and it's designed and your events and your activities and your culture is intertwined, you're comfortable. But when you have to adjust to new classes, new teachers, new environment, it's not like it was when you were growing up in high school, and all these external things that you have to adjust to in relation to people who don't, and it's kind of a part of their daily life. That's when you start to see privilege and, cases where it's not, just not privilege in a university sense. And overall, the university is moving in a positive direction in relation to incorporating these aspects. But we have to be aware and honest that in years previous across the entire United States, even Oklahoma, it hasn't been an important topic for people to think about or address as far as their plans for their system of education. So I know I said a lot, but basically weighing no stressors versus micro and large stressors. And that's how you can view privilege hearsay at a university.
Those were all great points, and thank you all for touching on that. We brought up hard conversations with conflicting viewpoints, with family, with friends, classmates, etc. How do we as students, how can we really go about having those hard conversations with family, etc.?
I think James should lead that one because he's been doing that more lately than, he just mentioned it.
All right, Christian, I'll answer that if you're gonna put me on the spot.
I put you on the spot.
That's okay. I'm okay with that. So for me, one of the most challenging things about hard conversations is attacking them with grace. So for me, like I've had hard conversations with people from my hometown that are just totally like they're like there's no problem, like it's just a few bad cops and it's not really a problem, and it's stuff like that. And I'm like, and for me, like in here I want to just yell at them, like that's like just I want to get angry. But if I get in this yelling match with this person, neither of us are going to learn anything or change our minds at all. And for me, like I know up here that the best way to do it is to really calm down and try to understand where they come from, their perspective, because from my small town, and it's not just small towns, it's Oklahoma City too. That's just my example is small towns. But they haven't seen injustice. They haven't been exposed to it. So that's really why. And is it their fault? I don't want to say it's their fault that they haven't been exposed to it. That's just their privilege. And like Evan said earlier, that they have the opportunity to ignore it because they haven't been faced with it day by day. So for me, it's really hard not to just start yelling at them and being very angry. But if you really want those hard conversations to produce anything and really make an impact on that person, you really have to attack it with grace and be like, well, you might not have experienced it, but here is this, and this, and lay out the reasons and the experiences. People that have died on the streets for selling cigarettes without a permit, stuff like that, and they don't realize they haven't dove in, and when they see stuff like the George Floyd situation and others in the past, they haven't had to pay attention because it doesn't affect them, so they really don't understand what's going on. And for me, and that's my family. Like I talk to people in my family about it, and for the most part, whenever I get angry with them and start being loud and trying to really push my point on them, they're not going to listen. They're just going to be like, nope, they're just going to close off and they're going to get defensive very quick. But when I am quick to listen and whenever I try to understand their perspective, they're more willing to listen to what I have to say. And I haven't experienced social justice as much as some people, but I'm very much willing to listen and willing to learn. And I try to help other people realize that, what, we are not always going to see all the injustice, but it's a problem. And if people are dying on the streets, it's obviously there. So we need to do something about it. And if you really connect each other by individual goals, everybody can agree that they want America to be a just society. And if you start with that one thing that connects, the one why behind you're having those conversations, we're more willing to talk because all right, well, we both want this one goal up here and we're both going to find different ways. We're starting from different perspectives, but we need to have those conversations to figure out how we can get to a just America that is that is fair for all people. So, you know, when you have these conversations, be graceful, find some way to find common goals that you're both reaching for, and and just have those tough things even when it's hard.
Anybody else want to jump in here with having difficult conversations with opposing viewpoints?
I think if you're willing to have the conversation, then you care enough about something to go all the way to the left or all the way back to the right. But I think there has to be a mutual understanding on both sides that I have my point, you have your point. We're going to reason and talk about these things together, and you just have to try to work to getting to where, you know, things are right. I mean, right is right and wrong is wrong. And I mean, it's not not to say that one conversation is going to change somebody's mind, because it probably won't. But I think a gradual progression of making it normal to, if you have a question, or if we want to, you know, talk about things, that's something that is normal, so that can happen. Those conversations can flow. And if there's growth within those conversations, hopefully we'll see gradual change. But I mean, I think James said it all. I mean, sometimes you want to come at someone strong and maybe malicious when in the moment, but thinking on it, if you come at me that way, I'm going to shut down, you know, or I'm not going to respond. Sometimes isn't necessary in the moment, yes, but I think, you know, for not even for everyone, but sometimes some people don't respond to that. And I think how he explained it, as far as going about it graciously but still stern and serious, I think, you know, he hit it on the head.
I think those are great points, James, really coming with grace. One thing for me is really just whenever having those difficult conversations, go slow and just try to lay out some examples, show them different things, and then get into your point. That can really help with just showing, here's different things going on, here's what I'm actually speaking on. So as a student, how important is social media in your activity?
I think social media is pretty important. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because a lot of the deaths we're seeing getting recognition, like George Floyd and other people like that, you know, their deaths were filmed, which is, I guess, in a way, it was a good thing, because then people actually believed what happened because they could see it happening in front of them. It's also just, I've heard it's very traumatic for people to keep seeing like death over and over again on social media. So I would use it with caution. It can be a great tool for organizing and spreading information, but I also think it can just be really harmful, because, you know, you can kind of get like desensitized to it almost. So
you really have to try to find that balance in there of good social media, not great for you social media, and that not great for you is literally not great for you, because everybody's different. Everybody can take in different parts. One thing you brought up, a great one, we had a navigating racial trauma panel a few weeks ago, and seeing these constantly on social media just keeps opening a wound and just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. So really trying to get that balance so you don't get too deep in yourself. Anybody else want to touch on social media? All right, so we have a question from Dr. Provencio asking, do you want your professors to be active in the fights for social justice? And how can faculty and staff help support those causes that you are passionate about?
Genuinely, I would love to see everyone like just be active in what they believe in, because why have a voice if you're not going to let it be heard? But I think it's a good question, because some professors, they do have a bunch of students, and they do have students of different backgrounds. And being active for those students is something that really warms my heart, because I grew up, like James, in a small town It's from Cache, Oklahoma. And there weren't a lot of people of color there. There was a lot of like white people, so it was a bit intimidating to be a Mexican and an Asian going to that school. But there were some professors there who, or some teachers there who would like try to engage in conversations to, help me feel a bit better about speaking out loud. And I feel like if you do that at a college setting, it will only amplify to possibly a greater degree and help those who really need that help. Because going to college is, it can be a life-changing event. Because for me personally, I came from a small town going to Edmond, and I had a little bit of a culture shock because it was so big and there were so many people here that I didn't know what to do. So if faculty and staff do try to be active, it would help immensely to those students like me. Now, the second part of that question, help in whenever you can. Like if you can go to rallies or protests, attend them. If you can donate to some legal funds or philanthropies or charities, do that. If you can just be a person there for a student, maybe the student just needs a person to talk to. That can help greatly as well.
I think that's a great point. Just them being active and just being there for a student, right? And especially in a classroom, I feel it's important. So, does anybody want to touch on like a classroom setting with faculty, staff, really helping with those hard conversations that we talked about earlier?
So I believe that it's important to have these conversations. I believe whether or not you have the same viewpoint as the instructor is another key point there as well. Personally, because I believe that even if you don't have the same viewpoint, it allows opportunity for growth, growth on your end, on their end as well. Kind of like what James and Christian were touching on being able to see both sides of things and being able to get a better understanding of where the other person is coming from. So overall, I think, yes, it's important, especially within a classroom setting. It's kind of funny because, we're at a university and there's so many things that we're finding out outside of the university. And it's like, had I known these things and learned them in a controlled environment and learned them in a classroom setting, like, I just wonder how differently things would be. So I'm learning things and I'm finding things out from talking to people and conversing with people, but had I found that out in my classroom and then my other classmates as well. So instead of, and I don't want to say, well, instead of being in a classroom and in a setting with people who are ignorant to an issue, when they know about it, it just feels that much better. And whether they have the same viewpoint as the issue as you or not, but just to know that they're able to learn about it and get the facts about it and then have their opinion versus someone who just has their opinion based off of what their parents have told them or who has formulated their opinion based off what they've seen on social media but to actually be able to learn about it, I feel like that's very crucial. So I feel like a way that professors can help is when they see things that are going on like in the news, in the media, things that are going on and surrounding us and affecting our communities to honestly just have a conversation about it, to talk about it and allow students, or maybe just give them the opportunity or the chance to, it's something that you guys would want to further learn about, something that you guys would want to further explore, or it's something that, doesn't interest you at all, because I believe that you'll find the majority of the students will be interested in that. And now you've built a curriculum or you've built you've built some type of learning around what's going on to where people are not only educated about what's going on, but they can formulate their own opinions, and then they can go back they can go back to their family, they can go back to their friends and say like, hey guys, like that's not actually true, like this is what's actually going on, this is why. So I believe like just through the education side of it, educating people, it's just amazing. So
Yeah, and I think as far as teachers fostering these conversations in the classroom, I think that's actually like Evan said, I think that's healthy. But there has to be an understanding of we're going to respect your opinion and your view, and we're going to respect each other's opinions and your view when we have these conversations, whether I agree with you or I totally don't agree with you. The fact that we're going to have this conversation and I'm going to respect you and you're going to respect me, I think that that's an important factor that a teacher has to, make sure all the students understand when they have conversations like this. Because I think in a situation where that doesn't happen, you could totally lose control of the classroom, and a student could be uncomfortable coming to class. But the good thing that I think could come from this, is that one, these conversations are being had, and so we're trying to eliminate the level of ignorance, and Evan addressed that. But also, I think that when these conversations are happening, it allows the teacher or the professor to understand and monitor the student more so than they would before. If a student is struggling crazy in the back half of the semester because emotionally they're drained because they're dealing with all of these things, that builds a relationship between the professor and the student for them to understand, maybe I need to talk to the student just this one time, or maybe I need to pull the student aside. And I think that also can allow professors to understand and push students to do better in class, maybe if they understand that a teacher cares or that a teacher understands that this is an important issue. And I mean, you could have a nice conversation in class could do many great things, but I think those two, for me personally, are just really big for me.
I think one thing as well is kind of in the same strain that there are, racist students across campus, and as other students, it's our job to hold them accountable to better our school. And so in the same sense, unfortunately, there are racist faculty and staff members across campus. And the more and more that time goes on, the more and more stories that I've heard about awful things that students have had to go through that I never would have had to think about. And so even though, we've been in spaces, I'm sure all of us where we'll just hear story after story about, don't take this professor because X, Y, and Z, or this professor made me leave my class, this organizational advisor did this person did this. But our voices don't have the same amount of power as even if we go to another faculty or staff member and explain these issues that another faculty and staff member has had to put a student through, not much typically happens. And in the same sense, if I was very lucky that I got involved early on campus, because if I ever was in a situation where I was treated differently by a faculty or staff member, I would know a lot of people that I could go to. But if you don't have those people, if you don't know those people, a lot of students just never know what to do and who to reach out to, because going to another professor in the same department could be really scary because you don't know if that faculty or staff member or professor thinks the same or if they would defend that person. And so I think it's very important for other faculty and staff members to hold other faculty and staff members accountable for those actions instead of, I've heard a lot of issues with professors or advisors where the issues are just kind of passed off. They're not taken seriously when it can ruin a student's experience at UCO. It can ruin a student's semester. It's so easy for one racist at UCO to destroy a student of color's experience here, but it is so, so hard to hold someone accountable at the same level. And so I think faculty and staff is a really great way to put in that work for students and making sure that you're holding other people accountable, but also making it very, very clear, like we've said, having these discussions, the hard discussions, and making sure that we're educating all of our students, but also making it very, very clear repeatedly that you are a safe person to go to and that students can come to you with these stories and that you can do everything you can to help. And I know sometimes that's not a lot. I know that not all professors and faculty and staff can go through and make this immediate change, but making sure that you are someone who's always working for the betterment of students, even if that means, having a hard discussion with another professor. I think that is just as important as us students, making sure that we're keeping our eye out for other students.
I think I would answer that question just basically off of why we're at college in the first place. Our main goal, the main reason all of us are here is to learn. And for me, and I'm sure David and Emily can agree, one of the biggest things we learned was the new culture. David mentioned the culture shock and then the come into a bigger place. And for me, and I'm sure they can agree, like that's one of the biggest things I learned. It was, the world is a lot bigger, and the world, there holds, like, even though I'm only 2.5 hours away from Edmond, I feel like I'm in a whole different place. So for me, the whole perspective and getting to know new people and new frames of reference is one of the most important things and one of the biggest things I learned, and you pick it up pretty quick on campus. So for me, learning those things is crucial. And for a teacher to foster those conversations is teaching those students that maybe they come from a small town, or maybe they just were never exposed to it, and maybe they are from Edmond, but they were never exposed. Learning those things is one of the most important things I learned, and I'm sure that having those tough conversations is going to expose people to new perspectives, new ideas, new ways of looking at things that maybe they never thought of before. So, if they're really here to learn, like that's one of the biggest things we have at UCO is like we have a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different perspectives. We need to tap into that. And if our faculty and staff is fostering those conversations, people are going to learn a lot more. Even if they disagree, they're going to get those perspectives, and hopefully they're going to listen with an open mind and maybe learn something. We might not change their mind, but they'll at least know, like, wow, like I never thought of that way. Because I know for me that happened a lot of times, is like, wow, I never even thought of that perspective because I was never exposed to it. So I think exposing students in the classroom through hard conversations is a great tool that our faculty and staff can use.
Okay.
You all brought up go ahead, Delon.
Oh, okay. I have a thought. It took me a while to get to it. So I think it's really important that just faculty and staff, but also students, make sure that they're observing the bias, whether it be like racism or sexism or homophobia, any of that, in their respective fields. Because you're at college to pursue something, and most likely you're going to be at an advantage when you're going to go into that field, and you're going to have influence in that field. So if you're going into law, you're going into nursing, medicine, anything like that, there is racism there. It's like a guarantee that there's already racism there. So you have to make sure that you're observing like what type of racism is there. Because, obviously the focal point right now is policing, and it's policing for a good reason. But, bias is everywhere. So we need to confront it everywhere. So I think it's just really important for teachers to look into their field and see, hey, what's wrong? What could I fix about this? So yeah, those are my thoughts. Just observe what field you're in and like what biases exist in that field.
You brought up some amazing points. I loved there was this central sort of idea that was going around with all of you was the thought of having a neutral party within faculty to facilitate those conversations, make sure they contain respectful and constructive across the board for all students. And so whenever faculty do have a certain way or certain things, being able for them to really remain neutral, and you could even maybe talk to a student afterwards, say, hey, I support your side, and talk to them about certain things. So one last quick question. What is a piece of advice that you would give a fellow student if they wanted to become an activist or active in social justice?
Okay, I guess I'll go first if that's okay. I think the first step is that, I guess it depends on whether or not if you're in that group or not, but just the first step is to take time to educate yourself and really understand what the issue is and like where that issue stems from and like possible solutions to fix it. And the second thing is to really take action in the spaces you're in. So this includes like your family, your friends, your school life, and this is going to be like a really stupid example, but I've been following like the K-pop thing happening on Twitter, where people are like mobilizing like the K-pop fans to do stuff. Like I think that's a great example. Like you can take action anywhere. Like in any community that you're in, you need to address it. So I don't care like how weird or stupid it is. Like you could be in a sport, you could be in a club. Make sure you're addressing it there, like everywhere. So that's my advice.
I would say I would tell them that it just starts with you, um, your daily interactions, and I kind of, with all seriousness, what I'm about to say, if you ever think that it is time for you to become an activist or to stand up, I want you to remember this. Don't think about it too much, like Drake says, and just do it like Nike, okay? Don't think about it too much because it's already on your heart and in your mind. And just do it like Nike because if it's in your heart and it's in your mind, the only thing left for you to do is just do it. So, yeah.
David, Evan, Emily, Christian, anything in there? Any suggestions?
I think one thing I might have to say is encouraging students to look at where they're at. I know a couple of us were on a call with one of our Oklahoma senators a while back, and we got kind of asked the question is, have all students had the same experience that you have? And even down to being able to come to UCO. Like I wouldn't be able to come here if it wasn't for my scholarships. But at the same time, I wouldn't have gotten those scholarships if my mom hadn't gone to college before and known how to fill out scholarships. If it wasn't for all the time that I had to do student organizations and to do my homework and the ability I had a car and I was able to drive like across the state doing these things. Those are the reasons that I got those scholarships, and I wouldn't have been able to even have access to those if it wasn't for all these privileges that I had. And so even from the very basis of me being at UCO comes from my privilege that I experienced throughout my life in this tiny small town. And so I think being able to recognize that a lot of us are in the leadership positions that we're in because we're white or because it's easy to experience that. You know, I wouldn't have gotten involved in UCOSA as a freshman if it wasn't for word of mouth. So I would not be in any of the positions that I am to this day if it wasn't for these privileges. Like you can trace everything you have back to the root of why. And a lot of us, I think, that's like a threatening, like I think someone said earlier, that's like a threatening discussion when you ask somebody to recognize why they are where they are. And so I think that's something that our fellow white students, we can really take the time to sit back and recognize what we have and then make sure that you uplift students who don't have those same privileges. And I think that's one of the most important things we can do is if we want students to be able to have the same access and the same experiences that we have, what are we doing every single day to uplift students?
My piece of advice would be, well, first, like Falana said, educate yourself on what you care about, but you should also not let like two or three people change your opinion because they have like your attention. Like just be true to yourself. Don't change your opinions because someone told you to, or um, because you read online that this isn't the right thing. You should research what you want to fight for and just keep learning about that. and try to see from both sides if possible. I know that earlier we had that conversation, or the topic of hard conversations. James and Christian both brought up a common topic of listening. Listening does wonders because you not only hear their perspective, but you also see why they have that perspective. And I think when you realize why they have that perspective, you can try to find either common ground or common topics to see how everything lines up, because not everything is as mutually exclusive as people think they are.
I would say if you're thinking about it, you probably already doing it. I would say to start with kind of smaller things, so things that you see around you, call people out on them, because when someone gets away with something once, they think that it's okay to continue to do. And like the key thing is like what James is talking about. You don't have to be rude to be like what is, sometimes you can just ask someone or just have a conversation with someone and just say like, hey, like what you just said is not acceptable, and if you want to continue to have conversations around me or to me, I'm not going to accept that. And so I think you can start with just little things like that and then build upon them. And again, it's been mentioned too, you don't have to be someone who uses their voice to scream and yell and be so vocal. But you can be an activist who is someone behind a computer screen. You can be someone who is sending letters. You can be someone who has a way with words, but not necessarily the voice behind those words. So I would just say to just really just fight for what you believe in. And if I had like a closing remark, I would just say that things seem so obtainable until they are obtained. So don't think of things as so far in the future of this will eventually happen or we'll eventually get there or this is impossible. Instead, think of things of just you don't have the answers yet, but you're on a continuous path and a continuous road to fight for those answers, to try and find the solution to your problems. So yeah, thank you.
Any final words, James? Anything you would like to talk about?
Oh no, I just want to encourage everybody. I think a lot of times we have these hard conversations and stuff for a couple months, and then the conversation dies down. And for me, that's like one of the most disheartening things is that we let it kind of play its role for a while, and then it becomes less of the trendy thing to do and less of the popular thing to do, and we lose the momentum that we have. And it seems like that's a natural thing, but I don't think it has to be like that. I think we can need to continue to push because in our government and our system, things happen slow and reform happens slow, but I don't think that needs to stop us. I think like keeping the pressure on and really staying focused on why we're doing what we're doing, I think that's one of the most important things, because if we are focused on why, it's really going to keep us motivated and keep us realizing like the purpose of what we're doing, and it's going to keep us centered around why we're doing what we're doing, and it's going to encourage more people to join in with us. People will work for a what, but they will die for a why. So I think it's incredibly important that we stay centered on why we're doing what we're doing.
Awesome. Thank you all for coming on here, for answering these questions. Thank you everybody for attending. We're coming to the end of our time, so just wanted to say a quick thank you, and that the Office of Diversity Inclusion, our next sort of session that we will be hosting is The Conversation, Stonewall Civil Rights and Pride. It will be next Wednesday, July 1st, also at 2 p.m. If you keep watching our social media, we'll be putting everything out there, where to register, what'll be going on. So thank you all for coming and speaking with us. Thank you all for listening to us all talk, and have a good day.